A single mother's son risked his own life to save a stranger on a bridge. When she opened the door the next morning and saw who was waiting outside, she couldn't hold back her tears. Marcus leaned against the cold metal railing of the Jefferson Bridge, his backpack heavy with textbooks at his feet. The afternoon sun caught the windows of passing cars, making him squint. He checked his phone. 3:45 p.m. His mom wouldn't be home from her cleaning job until 7. Just another Tuesday, he muttered, watching a businessman hurry past in an expensive suit. That morning's conversation with his mother played in his head as he watched the traffic below. "Marcus, baby, remember to lock up when you leave," she'd said, adjusting her cleaning uniform in the cramped bathroom mirror of their one-bedroom apartment. "And don't forget your key this time." "I won't, Mom." He'd watched her pack her lunch, just a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, into a worn plastic container. "There's leftover spaghetti in the fridge for dinner. Heat it up good." "Okay. And do your homework before watching TV." "Yes, Mom." He'd noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped slightly. "I mean it about that homework. You're a smart boy, Marcus. You just got to apply yourself." Now, standing on the bridge, Marcus pulled out his math textbook. He might as well get some studying done while he watched the world go by. This spot had become his after-school routine over the past few months. Something about being suspended above the river, watching boats and cars and people, made him feel connected to the bigger world beyond his neighborhood. A group of kids from his school passed by, laughing and pushing each other. "Yo, Marcus," called Jerome, a boy from his class. "You doing that bridge thing again?" "Yeah," Marcus answered, not embarrassed. "It's quiet here. Good place to think." "Man, you weird," Jerome laughed, but there was no malice in it. "Come play basketball with us sometime instead of standing here like a statue." "Maybe tomorrow," Marcus said, knowing he probably wouldn't. The bridge had become his spot, his escape. He turned back to his math homework, using the railing as a makeshift desk. The problems weren't too hard once he focused. His teacher, Ms. Thompson, had told him he had a natural talent for numbers. "You could do advanced classes if you wanted," she'd said. But advanced classes meant extra fees for materials, and Marcus knew better than to even ask his mom about that. A cool breeze lifted the pages of his textbook. Fall was coming, and soon he'd need his winter coat, the same one he'd worn last year, now a little too small. His mom had promised to look for a new one at the thrift store when she got paid next week. The sound of expensive shoes clicking on pavement caught his attention. An elderly man in a tailored suit approached, walking slowly. Something about his gait seemed off. Marcus watched as the man stopped about 20 feet away, gripping the railing with both hands. The man's knuckles were white against the metal. His breathing looked heavy, labored. Marcus noticed a slight swaying in his stance. "Sir," Marcus called out, closing his textbook. "Are you okay?" The man turned his head slightly but didn't seem to focus on Marcus. His face was pale, almost gray. A sheen of sweat covered his forehead despite the cool air. I don't." The man's words slurred together. His grip on the railing loosened. Marcus's heart jumped into his throat. Something was very wrong. More people walked past, absorbed in their phones or conversations, not noticing the scene unfolding. The elderly man took a stumbling step backward, then forward again. His expensive leather shoe scraped against the pavement. "Sir," Marcus called again, louder this time. He shoved his textbook into his backpack, eyes fixed on the man's increasingly unstable movements. The man's knees buckled slightly. His hand slipped on the railing. Marcus felt frozen in place, watching as if in slow motion as the gentleman's body began to tilt forward over the railing. A woman walking past finally noticed and screamed. The sound broke Marcus's paralysis. He lunged forward, his worn sneakers scraping against the concrete as his mind raced with possibilities of what might happen next. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus watched the man's body lean further over the edge. The river churned far below, indifferent to the drama unfolding above it. Cars continued to pass, their drivers unaware of the life hanging in the balance just feet away. "Somebody help!" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. But he knew, with terrible clarity, that it would all be over in seconds if he didn't act now. His body moved before his brain could fully process the danger. The distance between them disappeared in 3 desperate strides. Marcus's hands reached out, grabbing the back of the man's expensive suit jacket just as the gentleman's feet left the ground. The weight nearly pulled Marcus over too. His stomach slammed against the railing, knocking the wind out of him. But he held on. He had to hold on. "Help!" he screamed again, feeling the fabric starting to slip through his fingers. "Please, somebody help us." The woman who had screamed was frozen in place, hand over her mouth. But others were finally noticing. A construction worker dropped his lunchbox and ran toward them. A taxi screeched to a halt on the bridge. "Hold on, kid," the construction worker shouted. "I'm coming." Marcus's arms burned. The man was completely limp now, a dead weight that threatened to pull them both over. Tears streamed down Marcus's face from the strain, but he didn't let go. He couldn't let go. The construction worker reached them, his strong arms wrapping around Marcus's waist, anchoring them both. Together, they pulled the elderly man back over the railing. They collapsed in a heap on the sidewalk as a crowd gathered around them. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted. Marcus heard the sound of people dialing phones, voices speaking urgently to emergency operators. The elderly man lay on his back, eyes closed but chest rising and falling. His expensive suit was wrinkled and dirty now, but he was alive. He was alive. Marcus sat on the concrete, his whole body shaking. The construction worker kept a steady hand on his shoulder. "You okay, son?" the man asked. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Marcus couldn't speak. His arms felt like jelly, and his stomach hurt where he'd hit the railing. But his eyes stayed fixed on the elderly man's face, watching for any sign of consciousness. The man's eyelids fluttered. His lips moved slightly. "Thomas," he whispered. "Call Thomas." "Who's Thomas?" someone in the crowd asked. The elderly man's eyes opened slightly, focusing on Marcus with surprising clarity. "My son," he managed to say. "Thomas Wellington." A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone knew that name. Thomas Wellington was one of the city's most prominent businessmen, his name on buildings and charity foundations throughout downtown. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Marcus finally found his voice. "You're going to be okay, sir," he said, surprised by how steady he sounded. "Help is coming." The old man reached out a trembling hand. Marcus took it, holding firmly as the ambulance pulled up and paramedics rushed toward them with their equipment. As they loaded the elderly man onto a stretcher, his grip on Marcus's hand tightened briefly. "Thank you," he whispered. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus, sir. Marcus Thompson." "Marcus," the man repeated softly. "God sent you to this bridge today." Then the paramedics were lifting him into the ambulance, and his hand slipped away from Marcus's. A police officer approached, notebook in hand, while the construction worker explained what had happened to another officer. Marcus stayed seated on the concrete, his backpack forgotten against the railing. The math homework that had seemed so important just minutes ago now felt like it belonged to another life entirely. The officer knelt beside him. "That was incredibly brave, young man. We'll need to take your statement, and then we should call your parents." Marcus nodded, still watching the ambulance as its sirens wailed to life. As it pulled away, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't yet understand. The crowd began to disperse. The construction worker retrieved his lunchbox. Traffic resumed its normal flow. But Marcus knew the bridge would never look the same to him again. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands to call his mother. The screen showed 4:15 p.m. Somehow, only 30 minutes had passed since he'd been doing his math homework, living his normal life. Just another Tuesday, he'd thought earlier. He couldn't have been more wrong. The police officer's questions seemed endless. Marcus sat in the back of the patrol car, not under arrest but sheltered from the growing crowd of onlookers who had gathered to watch the aftermath of the incident. "And you've never met Mr. Wellington before?" the officer asked again, his pen hovering over his notepad. "No, sir. Never seen him before today." Marcus's hands had finally stopped shaking, but his stomach still hurt where he'd hit the railing. "What made you notice something was wrong?" Marcus thought back to those crucial moments. His walk was weird, like he couldn't keep his balance. And his face, it was all gray and sweaty. The officer nodded, writing everything down. "Your mom's on her way." "Yeah, she had to leave work early." Marcus felt guilty about that. Every hour of work mattered for his mom. Through the car window, he watched more news vans pulling up. A reporter was interviewing the construction worker who had helped pull them back over the railing. "That's enough questions for now," the officer said, closing his notebook. You should get checked out by the paramedics before you leave. I'm fine, Marcus insisted, but his ribs throbbed in protest. A familiar voice cut through the crowd. Marcus! Baby, where's my baby? His mother pushed through the onlookers, still in her cleaning uniform, her face tight with worry. The officer opened the car door, and Marcus practically fell into her arms. Mom, I'm okay, he said, but he held onto her just as tightly as she held him. What happened? They just said there was an incident on the bridge, that you helped someone. Her eyes scanned him for injuries. The officer explained the situation while a paramedic finally convinced Marcus to sit on the back of an ambulance for examination. Bruised ribs, the paramedic concluded after a gentle probe that made Marcus wince. Nothing broken, but he'll be sore for a few days. He's lucky and brave. His mother stood nearby, one hand pressed to her mouth as she heard the full story of what her son had done. Could have been 2 deaths today if your boy hadn't acted so quick, the construction worker said, coming over to shake Marcus's hand again. Never seen anything like it. No hesitation. He just moved. Marcus watched his mother's face cycle through fear, pride, and something else he couldn't quite read. My baby could have died, she whispered. But I didn't. Mom. I couldn't just watch him fall. I couldn't. A news reporter approached them, microphone in hand, but the officer intervened. The family needs some space right now. Marcus was grateful. His head was starting to hurt, and the crowd's energy felt overwhelming. Can we go home? He asked his mother. She nodded, gathering him close again. Yes, baby. Let's go home. The officer offered them a ride, which they accepted. In the back seat, Marcus leaned against his mother, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him drained. Your backpack, he remembered suddenly. Already got it, his mother said, patting the worn bag at her feet. Though I don't know if you're doing any homework tonight. The ride home was quiet. Marcus watched the city pass by through the window, everything looking somehow different than it had that morning. They passed the hospital where they'd taken Mr. Wellington, and Marcus sat up straighter. Can we find out if he's okay? He asked the officer. The hospital's received instructions to update us on his condition. I'll make sure you know when we hear something. At their apartment building, the officer helped them up the stairs. Their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, poked her head out as they passed. "Que pasó?" she asked, concerned. Later, Marcus's mother said tiredly. I'll explain later. Inside their small apartment, Marcus sank onto the worn couch while his mother went to make tea. The familiar sounds of her in the kitchen, the kettle filling, cups clinking, helped settle his nerves. His phone buzzed. Messages from classmates were pouring in. Yo, you're on the news. That was crazy, brave man. Did you really save some rich guy? He turned the phone off. It felt too much right now. His mother returned with 2 cups of tea and sat beside him. For a long moment, they just sat there, the events of the day settling around them like dust. You could have died, she finally said again, her voice barely a whisper. Mom dash. No, let me finish. She set her tea down and turned to face him. You could have died, and that terrifies me more than anything in this world. But you saved that man's life. You did something most grown men wouldn't have had the courage to do. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm so proud of you, and so scared, and so grateful, all at the same time. Marcus felt his own eyes welling up. I was scared too, but it was like my body knew what to do before my brain could think about it. That's because you have good instincts. A good heart. She touched his cheek, just like your father had. The mention of his father, who died when Marcus was too young to remember, made his throat tight. A knock at the door made them both jump. Marcus's mother went to answer it, checking the peephole first. It was the officer from earlier. Sorry to disturb you, he said, but I thought you'd want to know. Mr. Wellington is stable. The doctors say he had a minor stroke, but they caught it in time. His son asked for your contact information. I hope that's okay. Marcus's mother nodded. Yes, that's fine. Thank you for letting us know. After the officer left, she started heating up the leftover spaghetti, insisting Marcus needed to eat something. The familiar smell of garlic and tomato sauce filled their small kitchen. No homework tonight, she said firmly. You need to rest. Marcus didn't argue. His ribs ached, and the events of the day played on repeat in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mr. Wellington's face as he began to fall. felt the weight of him pulling against Marcus's grip. They ate in front of the TV, watching the local news cover the story. It was strange seeing the bridge on screen, seeing the crowd gathered where just hours ago he'd been doing his math homework. His mother turned it off when they showed a blurry cell phone video of the actual rescue. "That's enough of that," she said. Later, lying in bed, Marcus could hear his mother on the phone in the living room, talking quietly to his aunt, telling the story again. The pride in her voice carried through the thin walls. He touched his ribs gently, feeling the tender spots. The paramedic had given them some ice packs, and his mother had insisted he use them before bed. His phone buzzed again on the nightstand. More messages, more people wanting to know what happened. He left it face down. Tomorrow would be different, he knew. Tomorrow there would be questions and attention and probably more news reporters. But for now, in the darkness of his room, with the familiar sounds of his mother's voice and the city traffic outside his window, Marcus let himself feel everything. The fear, the pride, the pain in his ribs, the relief that both he and Mr. Wellington were okay. Just before he drifted off to sleep, he remembered Mr. Wellington's words. "God sent you to this bridge today." Maybe he was right. Maybe some things happened for a reason. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe sometimes you just had to act, had to reach out and grab hold. Even when you were scared, even when you weren't sure you were strong enough. The last thing Marcus heard before sleep took him was his mother, still on the phone. "My boy," she was saying, her voice full of emotion. "My brave, brave boy." Marcus woke to the sound of his mother talking in the kitchen. Morning light filtered through his thin curtains, and for a moment, he forgot about everything that had happened. Then he tried to sit up. His ribs screamed in protest. "Yes, he's still sleeping," he heard his mother say. "No, I don't think he should go to school today. He needs rest." Marcus checked his phone. 27 missed calls. Over 100 text messages. 15 voicemails. His Instagram follow account had jumped by several hundred overnight. "Mom," he called out, wincing as he swung his legs over the side of the bed. She appeared in his doorway, phone pressed to her shoulder. "How are you feeling, baby?" "So." He gestured to her phone. "Who is it?" "The hospital. Mr. Wellington's doctor." She returned to the phone. "Yes, he's awake now." "Hold on." She handed him the phone, mouthing, "Be polite." "Hello," Marcus said, trying to sound more awake than he felt. "Good morning, Marcus. This is Dr. Chen from Metro General. I'm calling because Mr. Wellington has requested to see you. He's doing much better this morning and would very much like to thank you in person." Marcus looked at his mother, who had heard through the phone speaker. She nodded. "Okay," he said. "When? Would this afternoon be possible?" "Say around 2 o'clock." After confirming the details, Marcus handed the phone back to his mother. His stomach growled. "Breakfast first," she said firmly. "Then a shower. The news vans are still outside." "What?" Marcus went to his window and peeked out. Sure enough, 3 news vans were parked on their street. Over breakfast, eggs and toast his mother had managed to make despite clearly being distracted. They watched the morning news. Marcus's stomach turned as he saw himself on TV, the shaky cell phone footage playing again and again. "Teen hero saves prominent businessman's father," the headline read. "Your principal called," his mother said, turning off the TV. "She says take as many days as you need. And the police dropped this off early this morning." She handed him a card with a case number and contact information. "They said to call if we need anything." Marcus pushed his eggs around his plate. "Is this weird?" "It feels weird." His mother reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Baby, you did something extraordinary. The world's going to want to talk about it for a while. I just did what anyone would do." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone would have done what you did. That's why it's news." After breakfast, Marcus checked his phone again. Messages from classmates, teachers, people he didn't even know. One caught his eye, from Jerome. "Yo, maybe standing on that bridge wasn't so weird after all. You're a real one, Marcus." That made him smile. The shower helped with his sore muscles, but getting dressed was a challenge. Every movement pulled at his bruised ribs. His mother had called into work, taking a rare day off to be with him. "The hospital sent a car," she announced around 1:30. "They don't want us fighting through the reporters." The car turned out to be a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. The driver, a professional-looking woman in a suit, helped them navigate past the news vans without being spotted. "Mr. Wellington requested our service," she explained as they pulled away from the curb. He wanted to ensure your privacy. The hospital was a 20-minute drive away. Marcus watched the city pass by, everything looking somehow different than it had yesterday morning. Had it really only been yesterday? They were led through a private entrance and up to a VIP floor Marcus hadn't even known existed. The halls were quiet, the floors gleaming. A security guard checked their names against a list before letting them proceed. Outside Mr. Wellington's room, a tall man in an expensive suit was waiting. He had the same sharp features as his father, but younger, more energetic. Thomas Wellington. Marcus, he said, extending his hand. And Mrs. Thompson. Thank you for coming. His handshake was firm but gentle, mindful of Marcus's injuries. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept much. My father's been asking for you since he woke up, he said. The doctors say if you hadn't acted when you did. He trailed off, emotion thick in his voice. Marcus's mother squeezed his shoulders supportively. Inside the room, the elder Wellington was sitting up in bed, looking much better than he had on the bridge. His color was back to normal, though he still seemed tired. Marcus, he said warmly, reaching out a hand. My guardian angel. Marcus took his hand carefully, noticing how much steadier it was than yesterday. How are you feeling, sir? Much better, thanks to you. He gestured to a chair. Please, sit. Both of you. For the next hour, they talked. Mr. Wellington described what he remembered, the sudden dizziness, the world spinning, the feeling of falling. The doctors had confirmed it was a minor stroke, caught early enough to prevent major damage. If you hadn't been there, he said, shaking his head. If you hadn't noticed. I'm just glad I could help, Marcus said, uncomfortable with the praise. Thomas Wellington had been quiet, watching the interaction. Now he spoke up. We'd like to do something for you, he said, to show our gratitude. Marcus's mother started to protest, but he held up a hand. Please, my father is everything to me. What you did. He paused, composing himself. There's no price tag on that kind of courage, but we'd like to help in whatever way we can. The elder Wellington nodded. I understand you're quite good at math. Marcus looked surprised. How did you dash? The police report mentioned you were doing homework on the bridge. Your textbook was advanced for your grade. Yes, sir. I like numbers. The Wellingtons exchanged a look. We'd like to discuss some possibilities, Thomas said. But not today. You need rest, and so does my father. As if on cue, a nurse appeared to check Mr. Wellington's vitals. Tomorrow, perhaps, the elder Wellington suggested. We could have lunch. Marcus looked at his mother, who nodded slowly. That would be nice, she said. The same car took them home, weaving around news vans that had somehow multiplied during their absence. Inside their apartment, Marcus sank onto the couch, exhausted despite having done very little. His mother brought him another ice pack for his ribs. What do you think they want to discuss? He asked. I don't know, baby. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead. But whatever it is, we'll handle it together. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Ms. Thompson, his math teacher. Proud of you, her message read. And not surprised at all. Some people just have that special something inside them. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the ice pack work its magic on his ribs. Yesterday morning, he'd been worried about a math test next week. Now everything felt different, like his whole world had shifted on its axis. The sound of reporters outside drifted up through his window. His mother drew the curtains closed. Rest, she said. Tomorrow's soon enough to think about everything else. But as Marcus drifted off into an afternoon nap, he couldn't help wondering what the Wellingtons wanted to discuss. Something about the way they'd looked at each other, the way they'd mentioned his math skills. His last thought before sleep took him was of the bridge. For months it had been his quiet place, his thinking spot. Now it would always be something else, the place where everything changed. The next morning, Marcus sat at their small kitchen table, pushing cereal around in his bowl. His mother had insisted on taking another day off work, despite his protests that he was fine. Mom, you can't afford to miss more work, he said, watching her clean the same counter for the third time. Don't you worry about that. She wiped her hands on a dish towel. The Wellingtons are coming here at 10. Here. To our apartment. Marcus glanced around their small living space. The furniture was worn but clean, the walls needed paint, and the carpet had seen better days. But it was home. Maybe we should meet them somewhere else, he suggested. His mother stopped cleaning and put her hands on her hips. Marcus Thompson, are you embarrassed about our homes? No. But they asked to come here. And we're not going to pretend to be something we're not. A knock at the door made them both jump. Marcus checked his phone. 9:45 a.m. They're early, his mother muttered, smoothing her dress. Through the peephole, they saw Thomas Wellington standing in the hallway, along with two other men in suits. Marcus's mother took a deep breath and opened the door. Mr. Wellington, she said, please come in. Thomas Wellington ducked slightly to enter their apartment. Up close, he looked tired but energetic, like someone running on coffee and determination. Mrs. Thompson, Marcus, he said, shaking their hands. Thank you for having us. These are my associates, Mr. Chen from the Wellington Foundation and Mr. Rodriguez from our legal team. Marcus's stomach tightened at the word legal. His mother must have felt the same because she gripped his shoulder protectively. Please, sit, she said, gesturing to their small couch. The men sat, looking slightly awkward on the worn furniture. Marcus and his mother took the two dining chairs they brought over. First, Thomas began, I want to show you something. He pulled out his phone and showed them a video. It was security camera footage from the bridge, showing the rescue from a different angle than the shaky cell phone videos on the news. Marcus watched himself grab Mr. Wellington, saw how close both of them had come to going over. His mother's hand tightened on his shoulder. The doctors confirmed what we suspected, Thomas said, putting the phone away. My father was having a stroke. If Marcus hadn't acted when he did, if he'd hesitated even a few seconds. He paused, composing himself. Well, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I just did what anyone would do, Marcus said quietly. No. Thomas leaned forward. That's where you're wrong. We've reviewed the footage multiple times. Dozens of people walked past my father. They saw him struggling. But only you stopped. Only you acted. Mr. Chen opened his briefcase and pulled out some papers. Marcus's mother tensed. Mrs. Thompson, Thomas said, noticing her reaction. We're not here with lawyers to cause problems. We're here because we want to help. We don't need she began. But Thomas held up a hand. Please, let me finish. Marcus, my father mentioned you're good at math. Your principal says you're one of the brightest students she's seen, but that financial constraints have kept you from taking advanced courses. Is that true? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. The advanced programs cost extra. Thomas nodded. Mrs. Thompson, what if I told you would like to offer Marcus a full scholarship to Riverside Preps? The room went silent. Riverside Prep was the most prestigious private school in the city. Marcus had walked past its gleaming campus a few times, watching students in crisp uniforms enter through the iron gates. That's very generous, his mother said carefully. But we couldn't accept It's not charity, Thomas interrupted. And it's not just about gratitude, though we have plenty of that. This is about potential. Marcus has it. We've seen his test scores, talked to his teachers. He could thrive at Riverside. Mr. Chen spoke up. The scholarship would cover everything: tuition, books, uniforms, meals, transportation. There would be no cost to you at all. Marcus's mother stood up suddenly. Excuse us for a moment. She pulled Marcus into his small bedroom, closing the door. Mom, he started, but she held up a hand. This is big, Marcus. Life-changing big. She sat on his bed. What do you think? Marcus looked out his window at the brick wall of the neighboring building. I could learn more at Riverside. They have real science labs, advanced math programs. He turned back to his mother. But what about you? What about our life here? She pulled him close, careful of his still sore ribs. Baby, our life here has always been about giving you a better future. That's all I've ever wanted. A knock at the bedroom door made them both jump. Mrs. Thompson. Thomas called. There's something else you should know. They returned to the living room. Thomas had another paper in his hand. The Wellington Foundation would also like to offer you a position, Mrs. Thompson. We need someone to manage our new community outreach office. The salary is significantly better than your current job, and it includes full benefits. Marcus watched his mother's face carefully. She'd been a cleaning lady for as long as he could remember, working long hours for low pay. Why? She asked simply. Because we've done our research, Thomas replied. Your references say you're hardworking, honest, and good with people. Those are exactly the qualities we need. And he smiled slightly. We think helping others runs in the family. Marcus's mother sat down heavily. This is all very overwhelming. We understand, Mr. Rodriguez said, speaking for the first time. Take time to think about it. Review the paperwork. Have your own lawyer look it over if you'd like. But, Thomas added, the school year is already underway. If Marcus is interested, we'd need to know soon. Marcus looked at the papers on their coffee table. His whole future, right there in black and white. Could I? He hesitated. Could I see the school first? Before deciding, Thomas smiled. Of course. We can arrange a tour this afternoon if you'd like. Marcus's mother picked up the job offer, reading it carefully. In this position, when would it start? Whenever you're ready. We understand you'd need to give notice at your current job. A car honked outside, making them all jump. The morning sun had shifted, casting long rectangles of light across their worn carpet. Here's my card, Thomas said, standing. Take the day to discuss it. Call me when you've made a decision. After they left, Marcus and his mother sat in silence for a long moment. It feels like a dream, Marcus finally said. His mother picked up the scholarship papers again. A good dream or a scary one? Both. She nodded. Yeah, both. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Jerome. Yo, you coming back to school soon? People won't stop talking about you. Looking at the message, Marcus realized how different his life might be in just a few days. Different school, different opportunities, different future. You think Dad would want me to do it? He asked quietly. His mother's eyes filled with tears. Your father would be so proud of you, baby. So proud. No matter what you decide. Marcus touched the scholarship papers gently. I want to see the school. Before we decide anything. Okay. His mother stood up, straightening her dress. I'll call Mr. Wellington. But first, she looked around their small apartment with new eyes. First, I need to stop cleaning this place and actually get ready for whatever comes next. Marcus watched her walk to her room, her back straight, her head high. She'd always carried herself with dignity, no matter how hard things got. Now, maybe, things could be a little easier for her. He picked up his phone to text Jerome back, then stopped. How did you tell your best friend that your whole life might be about to change? That one moment on a bridge had opened doors you never even knew existed. Instead, he walked to his window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, the bridge waited, still connecting one side of the city to the other, still connecting different worlds, just like it had connected his world to the Wellingtons. The black SUV pulled up to Riverside Prep's iron gates at exactly 2 o'clock. Marcus pressed his face against the window, taking in the sprawling campus. Stone buildings with ivy-covered walls. Perfectly manicured lawns. Students in crisp uniforms walking between classes. It's like a movie, he whispered. His mother squeezed his hand. They both dressed in their best clothes, him in khakis and a button-down shirt, her in her church dress. Thomas Wellington waited at the top of the main steps with a woman in a tailored suit. Marcus, Mrs. Thompson, he greeted them. This is Dr. Harrison, Riverside's headmistress. Welcome to Riverside, Dr. Harrison said warmly. We're very excited to show you around. The main building's entrance hall took Marcus's breath away. High ceilings with wooden beams display cases full of trophies. A massive staircase that curved up to the second floor. Our school was founded in 1892, Dr. Harrison explained as they walked. We maintain our traditional values while embracing modern education techniques. They visited classrooms equipped with smart boards and tablets. A science lab with equipment Marcus had only seen in movies. A library bigger than their entire apartment building. This is our mathematics department, Dr. Harrison said, leading them into a classroom where students worked on complex equations. The teacher, Mr. Phillips, stopped his lesson. Ah, you must be Marcus. I heard about what you did on the bridge. Quite impressive. Marcus shifted uncomfortably at the attention, but Mr. Phillips was already turning to the whiteboard. Tell me, Marcus, what do you make of this? The equation on the board looked challenging, but Marcus studied it carefully. Numbers had always made sense to him, like a language he naturally understood. Well, he said slowly, if you factor out the quadratic on the left side. 10 minutes later, Mr. Phillips was beaming. Remarkable. Simply remarkable. In the hallway, Dr. Harrison smiled. I think you'll find our advanced mathematics program quite stimulating, Marcus. They visited more classrooms, each more impressive than the last. A music room with grand pianos. An art studio flooded with natural light. A gymnasium that could fit 3 of his current school's gym. And this, Thomas said, leading them outside, is our robotics lab. Inside, students worked on complex machines. A robot arm picked up blocks and stacked them precisely. Another robot rolled across the floor, following program commands. You can join any clubs or teams that interest you, Dr. Harrison explained. We encourage exploration. Marcus watched a student adjust something on the robot arm's programming tablet. His fingers itched to try it himself. Back in the main building, they stopped at the cafeteria for lunch. The food looked nothing like his current school's meals. Fresh salads, hot entries, a sandwich bar. All meals are included in the scholarship, Thomas reminded them. Marcus's mother had been quiet during most of the tour, but he could see her taking everything in, watching him carefully. What do you think, baby? She asked softly while Thomas and Dr. Harrison talked nearby. It's amazing, Marcus admitted. But, he looked down at his plate. It's so different. What if I can't keep up? What if I don't fit in? His mother touched his cheek. You've never let anything stop you before. Not poverty, not hardship, nothing. This is just another bridge to cross. The bridge reference made him smile slightly. After lunch, they visited the uniform shop. Blazers with the school crest, ties in school colors, crisp white shirts, all provided as part of the scholarship, Dr. Harrison said. We'll have you measured if you decide to join us. Their last stop was her office. Dark wood furniture, large windows overlooking the campus, awards and diplomas on the walls. I'll be honest, Dr. Harrison said as they sat down. When Thomas told me about you, I was intrigued. But after seeing you work through that equation with Mr. Phillips, after watching your reactions to our facilities, Marcus, you belong here. Marcus looked at his mother. It's your decision, baby, she said. But remember what your father always said. Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you. Thomas leaned forward. Marcus, can I share something personal? Marcus nodded. When I was about your age, my father, the man you saved, took a chance on a scholarship student. The boy came from a poor neighborhood, had nothing but talent and determination. Today, he's our head of research and development. Thomas smiled. Sometimes all it takes is one opportunity, one door opening. Marcus thought about his current school, about Jerome and his other friends, about his spot on the bridge where he did homework. But he also thought about the robotics lab, the advanced math classes, the chances to learn things he'd only dreamed about. If he started, then cleared his throat. If I say yes, when would I start? Dr. Harrison smiled. We could have you begin next Monday. Give you time to get your uniforms, your books, settle any matters at your current school. And Mom's job? He asked, looking at Thomas. The position is ready whenever she is. We can be flexible with the start date. Marcus's mother straightened in her chair. I'd need to give 2 weeks' notice. It's only right. Thomas nodded approvingly. Of course. We respect that. Marcus stood and walked to the window. Students crossed the quad below, laughing and talking. In a few days, he could be one of them. I want to do it, he said finally, turning back to the room. I want to try. His mother's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. You're sure? Yes. And he was. The fear was still there, but so was excitement. Possibility. Dr. Harrison pulled out some papers. We'll need signatures from both of you. Emergency contacts, medical information, class preferences. As they worked through the paperwork, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The decision was made. The future, however uncertain, was coming into focus. One last thing, Thomas said as they finished. My father would like to host a small dinner this weekend, to welcome you both properly to the Wellington extended family. Marcus's mother started to protest, but Thomas held up a hand. Nothing fancy. Just family. He's still recovering, so it'll be at his home. Casual dress. After they said their goodbyes, the same black SUV took them home. Marcus was quiet, processing everything. You okay, baby? His mother asked. Yeah, it's really happening, isn't it? She took his hand. It is. And you know what? We're ready for it. Back at their apartment, Marcus looked at his current school uniform hanging on the door. The worn blazer, the slightly too short pants. By Monday, he'd be wearing something different. learning different things, living a different life. His phone buzzed. A text from Jerome. "You ghosting me, bro?" Marcus took a deep breath and typed back. "Need to talk. Can you come over?" Some changes would be harder than others. But as his father had apparently said, education was something no one could take away. And this opportunity, this was something he'd earned, not just been given. He touched his ribs, almost fully healed now. The bridge had changed everything. But maybe that's what bridges were for, helping you get from one place to another, even when the crossing seemed impossible. Jerome showed up 15 minutes later, still in his school uniform. He stopped short when he saw Marcus's living room full of Riverside Prep brochures and paperwork. "What's all this?" he asked, picking up a glossy viewbook. Marcus took a deep breath. "I'm transferring schools." Jerome's hand dropped. "What?" "The Wellingtons, they offered me a scholarship. To Riverside Prep." The silence that followed felt heavy. Marcus's mother quietly excused herself to the kitchen, giving them privacy. "Riverside Prep," Jerome repeated slowly. "That fancy-ass school uptown." "Yeah, when?" "Monday." Jerome sat heavily on the couch. "Monday? Like, 4 days from now Monday." Marcus nodded, watching his friend's face carefully. They'd known each other since first grade, sat together at lunch every day, walked home together most afternoons. "So you're just gonna leave?" Jerome's voice had an edge to it. "Just like that." "It's not just like that. This is huge, Jerome. The kind of opportunity that what? Makes you too good for us. That's not fair." Jerome stood up, pacing the small living room. "You know what's not fair? Finding out your best friend is bailing on you through text. Having to come over here to find out you're jumping ship to some rich kid's school. I just found out today. I was going to tell you when? After you got fitted for your fancy new uniform." Marcus felt his temper rising. "Why are you being like this? You're supposed to be happy for me." "Happy?" Jerome spun around. "Happy that my best friend is leaving? Happy that you're gonna forget all about us once you start hanging with your new rich friends." "I would never save it." Jerome headed for the door. "Have fun at your new school." The door slammed behind him. Marcus's mother peeked out from the kitchen. "Give him time," she said softly. "It's a big change for him, too." Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon packing up his old school supplies. His mother helped him sort through what he'd need and what could be donated. The Riverside Prep supply list was extensive. Scientific calculator, she read from the list. Graphing capability required. "Those are expensive," Marcus started to say, then remembered. "Oh, right. The scholarship covers it." His phone kept buzzing with messages from classmates who'd heard the news. Some congratulatory, some hurt, some angry. He turned it off. That evening, they ate dinner in front of the TV, watching the local news. They were showing the bridge footage again, but this time with a new angle, Marcus's acceptance to Riverside Prep. "Local hero receives life-changing opportunity," the headline read. "They're going to follow you to school on Monday," his mother predicted. "We should leave early." The weekend passed in a blur of preparations. Saturday morning, they went to Riverside Prep for his uniform fitting. 6 sets of everything: shirts, pants, blazers, ties, plus gym clothes, lab coats, and winter gear. "You'll grow into them," the uniform shop lady said, adjusting his blazer. Saturday evening was the dinner at the Wellington house. House wasn't the right word. It was a mansion, complete with a gate and security guard. The elder Wellington greeted them at the door, walking with a cane but looking much better. "Marcus," he said warmly, "and Mrs. Thompson, welcome to our home." Inside, the dining room table could have fit their entire apartment. But despite the grand setting, the dinner itself was surprisingly casual. Thomas's wife Sarah told funny stories about their kids. The elder Wellington talked about his own school days. "I was terrible at math," he admitted. "Had to hire tutors constantly." "Not Marcus," Thomas said proudly. "Mr. Phillips says he's never seen such natural talent." Marcus felt his face heat up, but he was pleased. Sunday morning, they went to church. Their pastor mentioned Marcus during the service, asking the congregation to pray for his success at his new school. Afterward, people gathered around to congratulate them. "Your father would be so proud," Mrs. Johnson from the choir said, hugging him tight. Sunday afternoon, Marcus tried on his new uniform one more time. The boy in the mirror looked different. Older somehow. More serious. A knock at the door surprised them. It was Jerome. Can we talk? He asked, not meeting Marcus's eyes. They went up to the building's roof, their usual spot for serious conversations. The bridge was visible in the distance. I'm sorry, Jerome said finally. For what I said. I was being selfish. It's okay. No, it's not. Jerome leaned on the roof's wall. You're my best friend. I should be happy for you. And I'm gonna miss you, man. Marcus felt his throat tighten. I'm not dying. I'm just going to a different school. Yeah, but it won't be the same. You know it won't. They were quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint the city gold. Remember in 3rd grade, Jerome said suddenly, when Tommy Chen was picking on me? You stood up to him. Got a black eye for your trouble? Marcus smiled at the memory. Yeah. And then you jumped in and we both got detention. That's what I'm trying to say. You've always been there. Always done the right thing. Even when it was hard. Jerome turned to face him. What you did on that bridge. That was pure you. And if these Wellington people can see how special you are, can give you opportunities you deserve, then I need to support that. Marcus felt tears threatening. We're still gonna be friends. Hell yeah we are. You think some fancy uniform's gonna change that? Jerome punched his arm lightly. Just don't forget us little people when you're rich and famous. They stayed on the roof until the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing. When they finally went downstairs, Marcus's mother had ordered pizza. Jerome, stay for dinner, she said. It wasn't a question. Later that night, Marcus laid out his uniform for the morning. New shoes gleamed by his door. New backpack packed with new supplies. His mother came in to kiss him goodnight. Ready for tomorrow? She asked. No, he admitted. But yes. She smiled, understanding perfectly. Sometimes the scariest changes are the most important ones. Mom. He caught her hand before she could leave. Thank you. For everything. She kissed his forehead. Get some sleep, baby. Tomorrow's a big day. In bed, Marcus could hear the distant sound of traffic, the familiar noises of his neighborhood. By this time tomorrow, he'd be doing homework he'd never done before, using words he might not know yet, navigating a world so different from everything he'd known. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from Jerome. Kill it tomorrow, bro. Show them what Marcus Thompson can do. Marcus smiled and set his alarm. Tomorrow would change everything. But maybe, just maybe, he was ready for it. The first week at Riverside Prep tested everything Marcus thought he knew about himself. His alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. that Monday, though he'd barely slept. His mother was already up, making breakfast. Baby, you've barely touched your eggs, she said, watching him push food around his plate. Not hungry. The black SUV arrived at 6:45 a.m., right on schedule. Thomas Wellington had insisted on providing transportation, at least for the first few weeks. As predicted, news vans lined their street. Head down, straight to the car, his mother instructed. Inside the SUV, Marcus tugged at his tie. Everything felt stiff, new, uncomfortable. His shoes squeaked. His blazer smelled like the store. Riverside's iron gates opened for them at 7:15 a.m. More reporters waited outside, but security kept them at bay. Dr. Harrison met them at the entrance. Ready for your first day? She asked, leading them to her office. Marcus wanted to say no. Instead, he nodded. His schedule was packed. Advanced mathematics, physics, world literature, Latin, European history, computer science. Names of teachers he'd never met. Room numbers he didn't know. Daniel will be your guide today, Dr. Harrison said as a tall boy with glasses entered the office. He's in most of your classes. Daniel smiled, but Marcus saw the curiosity in his eyes. Everyone knew who he was, the scholarship kid, the bridge hero. First up is Dr. Stevens for physics, Daniel said as they walked. Don't let him scare you. He looks mean but is actually pretty cool. The physics lab had equipment Marcus had only seen in documentaries. Students stared as he entered. He heard whispers, saw phones quickly hidden as people took photos. Class, Dr. Stevens announced, we have a new student joining us. Marcus Thompson. More whispers. Marcus slid into an empty seat, feeling every eye on him. Now, Dr. Stevens continued, who can tell me about centripetal force? The morning passed in a blur of new faces, new concepts, new everything. In Latin, he stared at strange words that meant nothing to him. In European history, Other students referenced events he'd never studied. But then came advanced mathematics. "Ah, Marcus," Mr. Phillips smiled. "Ready to show us what you can do?" The equation on the board was complex, but numbers had always been Marcus's friends. As he worked through the problem, everything else faded away. The stares, the whispers, the stiff uniform. Just him and the numbers. "Excellent." Mr. Phillips beamed. "Simply excellent." At lunch, Daniel led him to a table in the massive dining hall. "So," he said as they sat, "that thing you did in math class? Pretty impressive." Marcus shrugged, opening his lunch container. "The food here looked like restaurant meals." "Most new students struggle with Phillips's class," a girl said, sitting down beside them. "I'm Emma, by the way. You're in my World Lit class." More students joined them. The questions started coming. What was it like? On the bridge? Did you really save Thomas Wellington's dad? Were you scared? Marcus answered politely but briefly. He didn't want to be known just for that one moment. Computer science came after lunch. The lab had rows of new computers, tablets for coding exercises, and a 3D printer humming in the corner. "Today we'll be working on Python programming," the teacher announced. Marcus had taught himself some basic coding on his old laptop. As they worked through the exercises, he found himself helping Daniel debug his code. "Dude," Daniel said, "you're full of surprises." The final bell rang at 3:30 p.m. Marcus's brain felt full to bursting. As he waited for the SUV, his phone buzzed. A text from Jerome. "Survived day one." Marcus smiled and typed back, "Barely. Miss you guys." That evening, doing homework at his small desk, Marcus felt the weight of everything he needed to learn. Latin vocabulary, historical dates, physics formulas. His mother came in with a sandwich. "How you holding up, baby?" "It's a lot." He showed her his Latin workbook. "I'm so far behind in some things." She sat on his bed. "You know what I always say about eating an elephant? One bite at a time," they said together. The rest of the week followed a similar pattern. Each day got a little easier. He learned the quickest routes between classes, memorized his locker combination, figured out which teachers allowed questions and which preferred emails. In physics, Dr. Stevens paired them for lab work. Marcus ended up with a quiet girl named Sarah. "I hate these goggles," she muttered as they set up their experiment. "They fog up my glasses." "Here," Marcus said, showing her a trick he'd learned in his old school. "If you adjust them like this." They ended up getting the best results in the class. By Friday, some of the staring had stopped. In the dining hall, his table had become a regular group: Daniel, Emma, Sarah, and a few others who seemed to care more about his math skills than his moment of fame. "There's a robotics club meeting after school," Daniel mentioned during lunch. "You should come." The robotics lab was even more impressive in use than it had been during the tour. Students worked on various projects: a maze-solving robot, a mechanical arm, a drone. "We're preparing for the state competition," the faculty advisor explained. "Could always use more programmers." Marcus watched the maze-solving robot struggle with a turn. "The sensor alignment looks off," he said without thinking. The team working on it looked up. "What do you mean?" He pointed to the slight wobble in the robot's movements. "See how it drifts? If you adjust the sensor about 2 degrees. An hour later, the robot was running the maze perfectly, and Marcus had found his place. That night, his mother worked late at her new job at the Wellington Foundation. She was learning her role, just like he was learning his. When she came home, they sat on their old couch, eating takeout. "Good week?" she asked. Marcus thought about it. The challenging classes, the new friends, the robotics lab, the way numbers still made sense even when everything else felt foreign. "Yeah," he said. "Good week." His phone buzzed. The robotics team had created a group chat and added him. They were discussing ideas for the competition. "Made some friends?" his mother asked, seeing him smile at his phone. "I think so." She touched his cheek. "Your father used to say that real friends see you for who you are, not what you have or what you've done." Marcus thought about Daniel helping him navigate the school, Emma sharing her Latin notes, Sarah's quiet appreciation for his lab help. They didn't care about the bridge anymore. They just cared about who he was now. Sunday evening, preparing for his second week, Marcus realized something. His uniform didn't feel stiff anymore. His shoes didn't squeak. The route to school didn't seem so daunting. He took out his phone and texted Jerome. "Got time to hang out next weekend?" I can tell you about this crazy robot we're building. The response came quickly. Only if you help me with my math homework. Genius. Marcus laughed and started organizing his backpack. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove himself. But for the first time since crossing that bridge, he felt ready for whatever came next. And that's why we're proposing a Bridge Safety Awareness Day, Emma finished, looking around the student council meeting. Marcus, would you be willing to share your experience? Marcus shifted in his chair. 2 months had passed since his first day at Riverside Prep, and somehow he'd been drafted in a helping plan this event. The robotics team had convinced him to join student council, arguing that his unique perspective could make a difference. I don't know, he said. I don't want to make it about me. Daniel, who'd become his closest friend at Riverside, spoke up. It's not about you, man. It's about showing people how to recognize when someone needs help. You're just the example. The student council president, a senior named Rachel, nodded. We'd focus on recognizing medical emergencies, knowing when to call for help, basic first aid. Your story just makes it real. Marcus thought about it. Mr. Wellington had fully recovered, but not everyone was so lucky. Maybe there was a way to help prevent similar situations. Okay, he said finally, but I want to include my old school. Rachel looked surprised. Jefferson Public? Why? Because emergencies don't just happen in rich neighborhoods. Marcus sat up straighter. And because I know some kids there who'd really benefit from first aid training. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Rachel smiled. I think that's a great idea. Emma, can you look into making it a joint event? After the meeting, Marcus pulled out his phone to text Jerome. They still hung out most weekends, and Jerome had visited Riverside a few times for robotics competitions. Hey, want to help me save more lives? Jerome's response came quickly. Bro, you trying to make saving people your brand now? Faced with tears of joy, Marcus explained the event idea. Jerome's next response was more serious. Count me in. I'll talk to Ms. Rodriguez about getting our student council involved. That evening, Marcus's mother was working late again at the Wellington Foundation. She'd thrived in her new role, organizing community outreach programs and managing charitable initiatives. Their apartment had a few new pieces of furniture now, and they'd finally fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom. Marcus was doing homework when his phone rang. It was Thomas Wellington. Marcus, how would you feel about having the event at the bridge itself? Marcus sat up. Is that even possible? The city's been wanting to install better safety features there anyway. This could be a perfect opportunity to announce those improvements and promote awareness at the same time. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning. Both schools' student councils met regularly. The city agreed to close one lane of the bridge for the event. Local news stations wanted to cover it. We need to demonstrate basic first aid, Emma said during one planning session. But how do we make it interesting? I know some guys who do park hour, Jerome offered. They could demonstrate different emergency scenarios. Make it dramatic but educational. The idea took off. They recruited drama students from both schools to act out scenarios. The robotics team even built a demonstration dummy for CPR practice. Mr. Wellington insisted on attending, despite still using a cane occasionally. I want to show people that there's life after a medical emergency, if you get help in time. The day of the event dawned clear and cool. Marcus stood at his spot on the bridge, the same spot where he'd used to do homework, and watched volunteers set up tables and equipment. Nervous? His mother asked, straightening his tie. He wore his Riverside uniform, but many of his old friends from Jefferson wore their uniforms too. The two schools, working together. A little, he admitted. News vans started arriving. The park hour team warmed up. First aid instructors set up their stations. Students from both schools began to arrive, mixing together as they explored the different activities. The mayor spoke first, announcing new emergency call boxes and improved lighting for the bridge. Then Mr. Wellington shared his story, his voice strong and clear in the morning air. But I'm not here to talk about what happened to me, he said. I'm here to introduce someone who represents the very best of our city's youth. Marcus. Marcus walked to the microphone. The crowd seemed huge, but he spotted familiar faces, Jerome grinning and giving him a thumbs up, Emma and Daniel with the student council, his mother wiping tears from her eyes. 6 months ago, I was standing right here, doing my math homework, he began. The crowd chuckled. I didn't know anything about strokes or emergency response. I just knew someone needed help. He talked about the importance of paying attention, of not assuming someone else would help, of learning basic emergency response. As he spoke, the Park Hour team demonstrated different scenarios behind him. It doesn't matter what school you go to, what neighborhood you live in, or how much money you have, he continued. We all have the power to help others. Sometimes it's as simple as noticing when something's wrong and calling for help. The demonstrations began. Students from both schools practiced CPR together, learned how to use the new emergency call boxes, watched presentations about recognizing medical emergencies. This is amazing, Thomas Wellington said, watching the activities. You've really brought these communities together. Marcus observed a group of Riverside students teaching Jefferson students about the recovery position, while Jefferson students showed Riverside kids some basic first aid tricks they'd learned in their neighborhood health program. Jerome appeared at his side. Remember when I was mad about you going to Riverside? Man, I was stupid. Look what you've done with it. What we've done, Marcus corrected. This wouldn't work without both schools. The event ran all morning. News cameras captured students working together, learning together. Mr. Wellington gave interviews about the importance of community awareness. The mayor praised the collaboration between the schools. During a break, Marcus walked to his old spot on the bridge. The view hadn't changed, but everything else had. This spot's kind of famous now, a voice said. It was Sarah from his physics class. You know they are putting a plaque here. What? No way. She pointed to a covered square on the railing. They're unveiling it at the end of the event. Marcus shook his head. That's too much. It's not about you, she said, echoing Daniel's words from weeks ago. It's about reminding people to pay attention, to help each other. You're just the example. The event concluded with a plaque unveiling. It was simple. On this spot, a young man chose to help a stranger. May we all be so brave and aware. Dedicated by the citizens of our city, 2024 afterward, as volunteers cleaned up and students from both schools exchanged contact information, Marcus stood with his mother, Mr. Wellington, and Jerome. So, Jerome said, same time next year. Mr. Wellington laughed. I think this should definitely become an annual event. Marcus looked at the plaque, thinking about everything that had changed since that day on the bridge. His school, his opportunities, his future. But also how some things hadn't changed. His friendship with Jerome, his love of math, his instinct to help others. Yeah, he said. Same time next year. His mother squeezed his shoulder, pride shining in her eyes. The bridge had changed their lives, but they'd taken that change and used it to help others. Maybe that was the best kind of full circle there was. 6 months had passed since Marcus first crossed the bridge to Riverside Prep. The spring semester was ending, and he sat in Mr. Phillips's advanced mathematics class, working through a complex calculus problem. Time's up, Mr. Phillips announced. Marcus, would you show us your solution? Without hesitation, Marcus walked to the board. Numbers flowed from his marker, each step precise and confident. This was his element now. Perfect, Mr. Phillips beamed. As usual, after class, Daniel caught up with him in the hallway. Ready for the robotics competition tomorrow. Their team had made it to the state finals. The maze-solving robot Marcus had helped fix on his first day had evolved into something far more sophisticated. Almost. Just need to run final diagnostics after school. The robotics lab had become his second home. Trophies from regional competitions lined the shelves, including one they'd won last month. Their robot, nicknamed Bridge Runner, had set a new school record. Your mom coming tomorrow? Daniel asked as they headed to lunch. Yeah, she got the whole day off. Marcus smiled, thinking about how different things were now. His mother had been promoted at the Wellington Foundation, overseeing all community outreach programs. Their apartment had new furniture, working appliances, and she'd even started taking online business classes in the evenings. At their usual lunch table, Emma was reviewing college brochures. Though only sophomores, Riverside students started planning early. MIT's robotics program looks amazing, she said, sliding a brochure toward Marcus. He picked it up, allowing himself to imagine it. A year ago, college had seemed like a distant dream. Now, with his grades and extracurriculars, it felt possible. Speaking of robots, Sarah joined them. The elementary school kids loved our demonstration yesterday. They'd started a STEM outreach program, visiting schools in Marcus's old neighborhood to teach basic robotics and coding. Jerome helped coordinate with Jefferson Public, ensuring the program reached students who needed it most. After school, Marcus headed to the robotics lab. The competition robot needed final adjustments. As he worked, Mr. Wellington appeared in the doorway. "How's our champion looking?" he asked, walking without his cane now. "Good. We fixed the turning radius issue." Marcus demonstrated the improved movement. Mr. Wellington watched with genuine interest. Since his recovery, he'd become a regular visitor to the school, particularly the robotics lab. "Marcus," he said after the demonstration, "Thomas and I were talking. We'd like to establish a permanent scholarship in your name." Marcus looked up from the robot. "What?" "The Marcus Thompson STEM Scholarship. For students who show promise in science and mathematics, particularly those who might not otherwise have the opportunity to attend Riverside." Marcus sat down hard in his chair. You've proved what we always believed, that talent and determination deserve nurturing, regardless of circumstances." Mr. Wellington smiled. "The scholarship would cover everything, just like yours does. One new student each year." Marcus thought about what this could mean. Other kids like him, getting the same chance he'd gotten. "Can we include a mentoring program?" he asked. "Current students helping the new ones adjust." "Excellent idea. You see, this is why we need you on the scholarship committee." That evening, Marcus told his mother about the scholarship over dinner, real dinner, not takeout, which she now had time to cook. "Baby," she said, tears in her eyes, "your father would be so proud." Later, doing homework at his desk, a new desk, in a freshly painted room, Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Jerome. "Yo, you coming to shoot hoops this weekend? Some of us Jefferson guys miss your ugly face with tears of joy." Marcus smiled. He still spent time in his old neighborhood, though it felt different now. Not because he'd changed, but because he'd learned to bridge both worlds. The next day, the robotics competition filled Riverside's gymnasium. Teams from across the state competed, their robots performing increasingly complex tasks. Marcus's team waited nervously for their turn. Next up, Riverside Prep's bridge runner. Their robot performed flawlessly. The crowd cheered as it completed the course in record time. Marcus caught his mother's eye in the audience. She was crying again, but smiling too. They won first place. During the awards ceremony, a photo was taken of the team, Marcus in the center, holding the trophy, Daniel and Sarah on either side. Their other teammates gathered around. It would end up in the yearbook, captioned "Riverside Robotics Makes History." But it wasn't the trophy that made Marcus proudest. It was what happened afterward, when a young black student from another school approached him. "Hey, aren't you the guy from the bridge? The one who got the scholarship?" "Yeah, that's me." The kid shuffled his feet. "I'm good at math too. Like, really good. But my school doesn't have programs like this." Marcus glanced at Mr. Wellington, who nodded slightly. "Have you heard about the Marcus Thompson Scholarship?" That evening, Marcus walked to the bridge. The plaque gleamed in the setting sun. He touched it gently, remembering that day that had changed everything. A familiar voice called out, "Thought I'd find you here." Jerome joined him at the railing. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights come on. "Remember when I got mad about you going to Riverside?" Jerome asked. "You were kind of a jerk." Marcus laughed. "Yeah, well, you proved me wrong. You didn't forget us. You found a way to bring people together instead." Marcus thought about the scholarship, the STEM program, the bridge safety initiative that had become an annual event. "One person can't change everything," he said, "but maybe they can build bridges." "Man, that was corny." Jerome punched his arm. "You've been hanging around those rich kids too long." They laughed, and Marcus felt the warmth of knowing some things would never change, even as others did. His phone buzzed, a group text from the robotics team about celebrating their win. Then another from his mother, reminding him about dinner. A third from Mr. Wellington about meeting the first scholarship candidate. Marcus looked at the messages, then at the bridge stretching before him, connecting one side of the city to the other. He'd crossed it hundreds of times now, in both directions, each crossing a reminder that the best journeys didn't take you away from who you were, they helped you become more of who you could be. "Come on," he said to Jerome. "Mom's making her famous spaghetti. You're invited." As they walked home, Marcus thought about the year ahead. More competitions, more outreach programs, more bridges to build. The sun set behind them, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Marcus Thompson, son, student, friend, bridge builder, walked toward home, carrying with him all the pieces of his life, past and present, old friends and new, the boy who'd done homework on a bridge and the young man who'd found his purpose there. Some said he'd been brave that day on the bridge. But maybe the real bravery had come after, in accepting change, in staying true to himself, in helping others find their own way across whatever bridges they faced. The city stretched out before him, full of possibilities. And Marcus was ready for all of them.